Before the COVID-19 induced global epidemic and the economic slowdown that followed, many African nations had been increasing their internal revenue drive, particularly in the area of tax. This has led to a number of new tax brackets, increasing enforcement all in all to further ensure that more money enters the coffers of most federal finance or central treasury departments. Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, increased the value-added tax, or VAT, from 5 to 7.5% as part of the amendments to the Finance Act of 2019. Nigeria's federal government made 2.5 trillion naira from VAT in the last 18 months. That is from January 2020 to June 2021. But some recent events look poised to shake up the arrangement around value-added tax. Rivers State took the federal government to court seeking to be in control of its VAT and income tax collected in the state. In the judgment handed down by the Federal High Court in Rivers State, the court granted an order of perpetual injunction restraining the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS, and the Attorney General of the Federation, both named as first and second defendants in the suit, from collecting, demanding, threatening, and intimidating residents of Rivers State to pay personal income tax and VAT to the FIRS. The FIRS is Nigeria's overall tax authority, and it has appealed the ruling and has received a stay of execution. It has urged Nigerians, particularly residents of Rivers State, to continue paying their VAT to it. This has reignited a conversation around tax collection and the distribution of revenue from taxes. Who should be collecting VAT? Is it time to rewrite Nigeria's tax sharing formula? Let's get into all of this as we take on Nigeria's VAT debate. I'm Tolulope Adelaru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now joining me today is Uzochukwu Obianu, Associate Director, Tax, Regulatory and People Services at KPMG Nigeria. Uzochukwu, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on Business Edge.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
All right, so to start this conversation off, let's establish what Nigeria's basic sharing formula is for the taxes. What has been the status quo regarding the conversation, particularly around VAT, as well as sharing revenue, basically, between all the government levels here in the country?
Okay, thank you. And this is very important to note. Tax in Nigeria is, as at today, or depending on which side you belong, before the judgment, the celebrated judgment earlier in the month, is administered centrally. And the FIRS has the responsibility to collect the taxes on behalf of the three tiers of government. Mm-hmm. So the FIRS collects the taxes, takes a 4% collection fee, as it were, and then the rest of it is distributed amongst the three tiers of government. The federal government gets 15%, the state government gets 50%, and the local government gets 35%. So essentially about 85% still stays with the states when the total amount is collected and shared.
With the states or with the originating state?
Well, with the states, as such, well, I like to again say, depending on which side of the argument where you belong, before early this month, I think about this the 8th or the 9th of this month, when that particular judgment was announced, you would say with the states. So it's shared amongst all the states. Mm-hmm. And the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission has how they have, depending on certain criteria, how they distribute. So it's not necessarily about the state where it is generated, but 85% stays with the entire states and local governments in the Federation.
All right. So now in particular for Rivers State, what was the issue in terms of how the tax was collected and then I guess at this point, percentage of what is then redistributed to the states? What's the basis of their argument before the courts right now?
Okay, so without necessarily going into very technical legal issues, I'd like to say that the trust of the matter, as far as the Rivers State is concerned, is that the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as we have it today, has not in any way listed value-added taxes as part of the taxes that should be collected by the federal government. The Constitution, as far as they are concerned, to the extent that there is no express mention of the value-added tax as one of the taxes to be collected by the federal government in the Constitution, specifically citing the exclusive list and the concurrent list of the Constitution, then the federal government should not be collecting taxes. As far as they're concerned, the taxes should be limited to those expressly noted and stated in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And unfortunately, value-added tax is not mentioned. So their view is that to the extent that is not mentioned, you shouldn't collect it. And in fact, the approved taxes and levies, which in a sense gave rise to who should collect what and who should not collect what, that to the extent that that act is also not pursuant to the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it's null and void. So they are of the strong view that it shouldn't be the federal government collecting, it should be the states. And they have gone ahead to already enact a law, a VAT act for the states, and which essentially mirrors to a very large extent what we have as the VAT Act that is currently being used for the administration of taxes in the Federation.
So now this particular court's ruling, the one that has now, that the FRS has received a stay of execution for, is actually not an isolated case. So in December of 2020, in a judgment delivered, the High Court in Kala's case held that the powers of the National Assembly to make laws imposing taxes do not extend to VAT. So VAT particularly seems to be a very contentious area of this tax conversation. Why do you think that is? This particular judgment I just referenced says they can make taxes, but your right to make laws regarding taxes stops at VAT. What do you think of that?
It's interesting because there's a bit of history to the VAT Act. Prior to the VAT Act, we used to have what we call the sales tax. Sales tax. The sales tax, interestingly, was administered by states and the FCT. So if you're coming from the sales tax, and then we had the VAT Act, which was really, a military decree, as it were, at that time. But by virtue of the Constitution in 1999, all of those were deemed to become laws and acts of the Parliament of Nigeria. So if you think back and say, well, it's coming from a decree, perhaps maybe all the dots and the I's were not all crossed at the time when that decree was promulgated. And perhaps we have not also taken time to see how we can fully integrate it into the current constitution. Then you will understand a bit of why there's a lot of controversy around the conversation of VAT. Secondly, when you think of VAT, you think of VAT and you think of economic activities. So the states where, or states that feel that we have by far more significant economic activities, like River States are, at the point where they feel that, why don't we collect these ourselves? Why don't we, take full benefits for the economic activities going on in our states? And this is not too far away from the general argument around federalism and all that. So it's within that context that the VAT conversation, has become such a hot issue. And like you rightly said, it's not something that started today. Okay, it's been on for some time, and people have been pushing to say, why should there be economic activities in my state? Why should there be so much happening in my state, but I do not have the opportunity to benefit directly or manage and supervise the VAT that accrues from that economic activity. After all, I have to provide infrastructure, I have to provide security and other related social goods. So I should be able to also get the full share of all that is happening in my state. So the background and also the conversation around federalism and trying to take full reign of the activities of the economic benefits of the economic activities in one state, those have all played a role in terms of the argument so far as the topic of VAT is concerned.
Okay, we're going to take a break, Uzochukwu. When we come back, there are a lot more questions because many are asking that if Rivers State wins on appeal, does this then mean it's automatically something that will then be in play for all states in the Federation? And really, at the end of the day, who economically benefits? You've made reference to states that may not have such economic revenue generation or economic activities right now. They likely will be losing if such a judgment is then in effect for all the states of the Federation. So let's get into those issues when we come back. We're looking at Nigeria's VAT debate. That's the value-added tax conversation following a ruling by a high court, a federal court in Rivers State, and of course, a stay of execution granted to the Federal Inland Revenue Service. This is a really hot issue. We're taking it on right here on Business Edge. There's more right after this. Still with me is Uzochukwu Obianu, Associate Director, Tax, Regulatory and People Services at KPMG Nigeria. Uzochukwu, let's quickly ask this question for maybe residents of River State who might be watching us. So the Federal Inland Revenue Service has appealed as expected because this would be a large blow to their activities, but they've also gotten that stay of execution. They've asked people to continue to pay VAT to them. If I'm a resident of River State right now, there's confusion. The state governor has just put in a new law. Who am I supposed to pay this to? Even though it's not like I'm the one handing over the money is taken at the point of purchase and all of that. How is this to work out for the residents right now in the midst of this legal conversation?
I mean, this is a very, very important question because one of the canons of taxation is that there should be certainty. There should be certainty of what the taxpayer needs to do, and the taxpayer should not for any reason be in the middle of this war. But as it is today, we have the River State VAT Act, and we also have the FRS on one side saying that, look, continue to pay. We have applied for a stay of execution, need to confirm if that has actually been granted. But the important thing at the moment is that it's important to note that the first return for companies in the River State will not be due until the 21st of September. So that gives us approximately around 25 days within which we must get some level of clarity. As it is today, depending on who you speak with in terms of even the lawyers, you will find some arguments saying that, well, to the extent that this is the subsisting judgment of the day, then the River State has the taxing rights. But some others will also argue that, well, there's an appeal before the appellate court, and to the extent that the FRS have also asked for a stay of execution, then we should maintain status quo. So there is, at the moment, it's not very clear what needs to happen, which is really why this conversation we're having now is very important, because we will really, really, really need the judiciary to bail the cat, because the taxpayer should never be in such a position where he doesn't know what to do and must not suffer any form of penalties or any form of harassment
or even double taxation, possibly.
Exactly. That should not happen. So it's up to the judiciary within the next 25 days to really, really provide clear and unambiguous direction for the taxpayer so that we will know exactly what needs to happen. Thankfully, we have about 25 days, and I think it's enough time for the judiciary to bail this cat, and so that taxpayers will not be in limbo as to what to do.
So let's look at the possible ramification for other states in Nigeria. So there are some analysts that are saying that if this judgment is upheld in favor of river states, it could actually spell economic doom for other states because they do not currently generate enough economic activities to boost their individual VAT return. So they've mentioned states like Kano, Oyo, Kaduna, Delta, even rivers itself may expect to experience minimal impacts, with at least 30 states, which account for less than 20% of VAT collection, will likely suffer significant revenue decline. There's also the point that the federal government could possibly find a positive in all of this as well later on. But particularly for the states, what do you think is going to happen if this judgment is eventually in favor of river states? What is your projection as to how it affects other states with their revenue generation and their ability to even make money to also spend on infrastructural development in their states?
You know, this is a very interesting discourse because when you go back to the revenue sharing formula that we talked about earlier in the program, the federal government takes only 15%. And 85% of that revenue, like I said earlier, stays with the states, whether at the state level or at the local government level. Now, if you remember that VAT is tax levied on supply of goods and services. So the more economic activities in a state, the more VAT you will have in that state. So if you take Lagos out of that equation, Lagos accounts for probably close to 50% of the entire VAT collected in the country. So when you take Lagos out, and based on a study I saw on Nairametrics, so Abuja is somewhere close to 20%. So we're left with about 30% for the rest of the states. And then you have states like River State somewhere around 7%, you have Kaduna, you have Kano, you may have Delta somewhere along that line, not so far away. But in general, it appears that most of the states might actually be worse off if the judgment is upheld at the appellate court and maybe Supreme Court, and the ruling is that VAT collection should be at the state level. A number of the states, in fact, most of the states, close to 30 states of the 36 will be in a by far worse position. Now, two things it can do, right? It can force states to begin to look inwards to say, what can we do? How can we make our environment friendly enough to attract economic activities? How do we leverage our competitive advantage in such a way that we can also generate enough economic activities that will help us to generate VAT enough to oil our states? It can also mean that some states will just be at the mercies of the financial institutions and they continue to borrow to support the activities of their states. And also, there's also the issue of efficiency in collection. Now, it's centrally managed at the moment. So FRS collects on behalf of everybody and then goes through the operational account and then is shared. What will happen if this judgment is upheld is that states will have to devise their own mechanisms for collection of the VAT. I must say that it's all easy to collect. It all sounds easy to collect until you begin to collect it. And then you find out that you need to make certain investments also to be able to ensure that you can even effectively harness the VAT that is available within your state and collect it for the use of your state. There are also other issues around, what about companies that have operations across many states?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you, ensure that, because it's going to create some level of multiple reconciliation issues, really. How do you ensure that you have captured solely the activities that have happened in a particular state and that you have reported in that state and not in the other state? Then there is an interesting conversation also around a very, very important principle around the VAT world over, the input and output mechanism. So that mechanism is such that, look, if I purchase goods for sale or I manufacture goods and have incurred input VAT at the point of purchasing the goods or at the point of purchasing the inputs for the manufacture of that good. When I sell that good, I should recover the input VAT that I have suffered when I purchase the inputs or I purchase the goods that I bought for resale. So what happens if I purchase in Lagos the inputs and then I sell it in Kano? How will that, what mechanism will be available to ensure that the taxpayer does not suffer for what I would say that it's a case of administration that has not been properly structured? So whatever happens, right, there is still a lot to be done in terms of administration to ensure that it works, just in case this is upheld at the appellate court and subsequently the Supreme Court.
And as you've raised a lot of questions, what is also apparent is that many states, if this judgment is upheld, would not be in a position to, even within the next 6 months, straighten out the administration, the collection, the framework necessary, the legal acts as well necessary as well. And I want to ask a question about the customers, because we're talking about the state's issues now. But if River State is now to set their own value-added tax, that means they could raise it as high as they want, or they could take it as low as they want as well. In terms of Nigerians, in terms of taxpayers, how would they benefit? Do you think, looking at the sustainability and solvency of the majority of states in Nigeria, if this judgment was in favor of River State, would then the ramifications be in favor of Nigerian taxpayers?
That's an interesting question. What I will expect that will happen is that, because it will be also a case of competition for economic activities, right? States will try as much as possible to woo economic activities in their states. But doesn't take away from the fact that you have mentioned that some states may feel that, well, we already have significant economic activities. And so what we need to do now is to up the rates.
Maximize.
So it's possible that we're also going to see that happen in some states. But then it will become real competition. And then people will begin to ask the question that, okay, so if you have a 15% VAT rate in one state, is there a chance that I can move my business just to the border of the neighboring state where they may have a VAT rate of 5% or a VAT rate of 6%? So you will find a lot of, it's going to be interesting. If I may use that word, it's going to be really, really interesting how it will play out should this go through and is upheld at the highest court. But it's also an opportunity for states to really, really begin to think about what can we do. So the states, even at the moment, should already begin to ask themselves the question, what if this goes through? The only major beneficiary, the person that really doesn't need to worry so much is Lagos State. Yeah. Because the economic activities sit here, right? But other states should be asking the question right now. So if it happens, what should we do? How do we ensure that we continue to generate enough revenue to all the states? So those are very important conversations that in fact should be going on right now. Yes.
And we hope they're going on at the individual state levels. As you said, about 25 days to the deadline in Rivers State for taxpayers to submit what they need to submit for the FIRS, or maybe at this point to the new agency that's going to be established, which has not yet been established in Rivers State, actually. A lot of answers today, but I also feel like we've raised a lot more questions. And as this case proceeds, Uzochukwu will definitely be touching base with you to look at the further developments. Thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you for having me. And I will very much oblige when you call again.
All right. So this conversation on value-added tax in Nigeria is not one that's going away anytime soon. River State received, I beg your pardon, River State received a judgment that allowed them to collect and distribute the value-added tax in their states as they please. But the Federal Inland Revenue Service has also applied for a stay of execution and has continued to tell River State taxpayers that they should continue to pay the VAT to them. As this story is updated, as new developments come about, we'll continue to, of course, bring it to you, because two things are certain in life: death and taxes. But who collects those taxes is going to remain a big question in Nigeria for some time. We're going to wrap things up with NC4 to watch, so stick around to see the stories we're keeping our eyes on. of our agenda, we are here in Nigeria, where Nigerian stocks appreciated by 0.07% on Thursday evening, reversing the previous day's decline as the economy expanded more than 5% in the second quarter of 2021. This information is coming from the National Bureau of Statistics. South Africa's energy regulator has backed a long-term government plan to build new nuclear power units, a move that could help to shift the country away from coal and into less carbon-intensive means of generating electricity. Africa's most industrialized economy has the continent's only operating nuclear plant, a 1,900-megawatt facility outside Cape Town that was built during apartheid. Dangote's oil refinery will buy at least 300,000 barrels per day of Nigeria's crude oil. This comes after the government granted approval for the state oil firm NNPC to purchase a 20% equity stake in the project promoted by Africa's richest man. Nigeria produces under 2 million barrels per day and has been seeking to attract a shrinking pool of capital for fossil fuel development. Just last week, President Muhammadu Buhari signed into law a bill for the oil industry, one that has been in the works for nearly 2 decades. And we wrap things up in the eastern part of the continent, where the Central Bank of Kenya has received bids worth 8.8 billion Kenyan shillings during this week's T-bills auction out of the 24 billion Kenyan shillings that was offered, an undersubscription of 36.47%. The bank accepted 7.8 billion, made up of 6.5 billion Kenyan shillings in competitive bids and 1.3 billion Kenyan shillings in non-competitive bids. And this conversation on that wraps up the week on Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Head to our website, www.newscentral.africa, and also download our mobile app on the Play Store and App Store. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, so if you've missed any of our conversations this week on important business, financial, and economic conversations coming from the continent, you can check it out there. I'm Tolulokwe Adeleru Balogun. Have a pleasant weekend, 11 a.m. West African time. I'm here on Monday, so you be there.